All right. Hello. I am thrilled that we are continuing the COGS Streampunk festivities. I'm thrilled to be here. For those of you who do not know, I am Leanna Renee Heiber. I am a actress. I am an artist. I am a tour guide. I'm a playwright. But above all, I am a novelist. And I'm here to do a little theatrical reading from my latest novel. This is my beautiful baby, A Sanctuary of Spirits. It's out now with Kensington. It's available in digital, wherever ebooks are sold, also wherever print books are sold. So support your local independent bookstore, request it from your local library, support them too. Libraries are great, especially right now, trying to help people stay connected. So one of the themes that I try to write about is about teamwork and staying connected. So we're all doing that a little differently these days, but the connection is still there nonetheless. So I'm going to jump right into the beginning of this book. It's set in 1899 in New York City, in Manhattan, and I have a group of psychic detectives who, along with their favorite friendly ghosts, are helping solve strange, mysterious, and esoteric crimes in New York. So it's a group of female spiritualists and some of their most wonderful allies, as you'll see from this scene. I'm not going to do any more explaining than that because I'm going to start at the beginning. And if I've done my job, you should be able to jump right in. This is book 2 of the trilogy. However, I've had many people say that they can jump right in with this, right into the action. And then if you're curious about the backstory, then, please pick up The Spectral City. So the Spectral City series is a trilogy. The third book, A Summoning of Souls, is up for pre-order now. It'll be out in July. So without any further ado, what I'm going to do, I'm going to read a couple of short pieces from this book. Then I'm going to open it up to you, the chat room. If you guys have any questions about process, I'm happy to talk about my novel writing process, my playwriting process, obviously ghosts. I work as a ghost tour guide. So those of you that joined my ghost talk yesterday, if you've got any other ghost questions, come on over, ask in the chat room, and I'll get to them as soon as I'm done with the reading. So if you are joining this afterwards, if you're watching this later at a later date, I am on all social medias. And so I'm always available to answer questions about writing and process. So don't be a stranger. I'm happy to answer questions at any time. I'm most active on Twitter at Leanna Renee. So my first and my middle name. That's where you can find me most often. Okay, so here we are. It's 1899. It's Manhattan. Chapter 1, Union Square. Maggie, Eve Whitby waved at the distracted ghost who floated before her, a transparent, grayscale and luminous form. Answer me, how could you, of all spirits, simply disappear? And what brought you back? I am dead. We do that sometimes, vanish, Maggie said with a laugh. She turned and began floating north in the direction of the train depot where they were headed. The wraith was a visual echo of the lovely young lady she'd been in life, dressed in a fine gown of the early 80s. Don't you be flippant, my dear, Eve chided, lifting her skirts and hurrying after the specter, running directly into the cold chill of her wake. We've been distraught for weeks, she continued with a shiver. We knew you'd never leave without telling us. We couldn't even catch a trace of you during our seances. The dark-haired man, taking long strides to keep up beside Eve, cleared his throat. The generally drawn pallor of Eve's cheek colored. I'm sorry, detective. She turned to him without breaking her pace. I forget you can't completely hear or see our subject here. Tall and lithe, with a neatly trimmed mop of dark brown curls that bounced in the breeze, dressed in a simple black suit with a white cravat, Detective Horowitz, in his mid-20s, was as sharp in wit and mind as he was in features. The angles of his face curved and softened as he smiled. His ability to shift from serious to amused was as swift as it was attractive. I'm catching pieces here and there, he replied, but to be honest, I'm more enjoying the looks that you're getting from passers-by, averting wary, disdainful eyes behind hat brims and parasols. Oh, Eve batted an ungloved hand, caring not a whit for the fine details of sartorial propriety, as gloves often got in the way of tactile experience important to her work. Mad folk walk New York streets daily, and no one stops them. It's one of the glories of the city, minding one's own business. Horowitz laughed and kept pace. The three angled along bustling Broadway as it slanted up ahead of them, the ghost at the fore, dodging passers-by with parasols and weaving past horse carts, careful to mind their droppings. Eve grumbled as the stray foot of a businessman's cigar was lifted by the wind onto her shoulder, and she brushed off the embers before they caught the thin wool on fire. She wore an adaptation of a police matron's uniform, a simple dress with buttons down the front, but in black, having donned constant mourning in honor of those she worked with and for, the spirits of New York. The detective didn't seem to hold Maggie's interruption against her, despite the fact that he'd been leaning toward Eve in a near kiss when the spirit's incorporeal form had appeared in between them. That the detective even entertained the idea of a ghost was a blessing. That he could slightly see and barely hear fragments from Maggie was incredible progress. Just weeks before, he'd been a confirmed skeptic. Perhaps Eve's sensitivities were rubbing off on the practical, level headed detective. The idea that she might be able to draw this man further into her world was an equally thrilling and cautionary prospect. Eve reeled in more directions than one. Maggie Haythorne had been Eve's dearest friend since childhood, the most trusted spectral asset in her ghost precinct since its recent inception. And the spirit didn't seem to be taking her own disappearance seriously. Yes, ghosts often came and went as they pleased, but they were generally creatures of habit, with particular patterns of haunt. Eve's ghost precinct of 4 mediums relied on the constancy of their stable of specters, Maggie at the core, until she'd vanished with no word. If the summer land draws you, and you wish to go, Maggie, Eve said earnestly, reaching out to the floating figure and touching chilled air, just tell us. I love and need you, but I know I mustn't keep my dear friend from her well-earned peace. Oh, my dearest friend. Maggie turned and reached out. A transparent, icy hand brushed across Eve's cheek. None of this was about wanting to go, but about wanting to stay. But come, there are details I can't trust myself to remember. I'll take you to where Sanctuary left me. You can't go in, but you of all people should know where I came out. She turned and resumed her float. Even the detective tried again to keep up. The spirits that pledged themselves to Eve's ghost precinct promised they wouldn't go on to the sweet summerland, as the spiritualists called their idea of a heavenly plane, without telling their coworkers. It was a way of ensuring that the delicate channel between the precinct mediums and the spirits did not tear itself into injurious pieces. An open psychic channel to the spirit world would hurt if torn away and not properly shut. A wounded third eye could never properly heal. It had injured Eve when Maggie had been ripped away. It seemed the spirit hadn't thought of that. Eve swallowed back a reprimand that would seem ungrateful, considering how glad she was to see her dead friend. Eve, who is this gentleman trailing you? Maggie waved an incorporeal hand toward the detective. Have you started hiring men since I've been gone? Eve shook her head. Detective Horowitz and I have been consulting on strange cases that have unprecedented intersecting patterns. He's been a critical liaison for the department and a valuable friend. To be clear, the detective added, looking vaguely in Maggie's direction as they continued uptown, his gaze focusing and losing focus, as if he faintly caught sight of her spectral person, then lost her again. I do support Miss Whitby and her precinct, even if I don't always understand it. The public at large didn't know about the existence of the small ghost precinct, technically part of the New York Police Department. The few lieutenants and sergeants who did know thought the whole thing preposterous. Full of hogwash, Eve had overheard one day in Mulberry headquarters. The fact that the ghost precinct was made up of women didn't help the force's estimation, and it had been Eve's hope that Horowitz, championing them, would help win over some colleagues, the ones who didn't similarly judge him for being Jewish, that is. The unlikely trio made their last 15 blocks to Grand Central quicker by jogging over an avenue to catch an uptown trolley line, hopping on the next car that clanged its bell at the stop. Maggie looked around with fierce interest in every sensory detail as the trolley dinged along, her luminous eyes taking in every storefront and theater. The venues grew grander as the blocks ticked up their numbers. The ghost seemed to study every horse and cart, carriage or hack, every passerby, be they elegant or ragged, watching the shifting sea of hats along the sidewalk, from silk top to tattered caps, feathered millinery to threadbare scarves, forms dodging and darting like fish in a narrow stream. Eve saw it all pass around and through the ghost, her transparent image superimposed over the tumult of midday Manhattan. "I've missed you," the specter murmured to the metropolis. Eve didn't hear New York reply, but she felt it in her heart. When one genuinely loved the city, the soul of New York took note. Watching Maggie watch New York was a study in eternal eagerness. Love kept the good spirits tethered to the tactile world. Moments like this, where Eve's lesson about life taught by the dead, drink it all in, all the chaos, the tumult, the bustle of existence and its myriad details as much as possible, as no one's relationship to it all. It could change at any moment. Once inside Grand Central Depot, a noisy, dark, crowded place filled with glass and trestles, soot and steam, a building nearly and dearly overdue for an upgrade to a full station, Maggie gestured towards a particular platform. "Transit is with us, and if we're quick, you can be back within the 2 hours I quoted," the ghost exclaimed, wafting up train car steps on the Northern Line. With a screeching rumble and a billowing burst of steam, they were off. Even the detective took a small bench at the rear of the car before pausing to consider whether it was wise to trust the demands of an excitable ghost. Greenwich Village, Manhattan. 3 mediums of the ghost precinct waited for their manager to return. Sitting primly at their seance table on a crisp late autumn day, hands clasped together, they were ready to begin. The lancet windows of their rear office had been cranked wide open to hear the clamor of New York City, meld with the rustle of falling leaves and the constant whispers of the dead. Cora Dupree, Antonia Morelli, and Jenny Friel had been left alone at the Ghost Precinct offices after having given their leader, Eve, a bit of a hard time about leaving again on a whim with the detective to whom she seemed to have a growing attraction. They knew that to wait for her to begin their seance would waste a precious opportunity for new information regarding the many loose ends of their cases. The 3 young mediums came from vastly different backgrounds and circumstances, but were brought together by their gifts and calmly began their ritual of communing with the dead. Cora, Eve's second in command, a year behind her at age 18, struck the match. "Good spirits, come and speak with us. In the respect of your life and your cares in this world, is there a spirit who would like our attention? We will seek our friend Maggie. We still seek answers for that which remains unsolved." 2 ghosts appeared, their transparent grayscale forms fully manifest on either side of the table. The 2 girls, little Zofia and the elder Olga, were immigrants from Poland and the Ukraine who had died in the same garment district fire years prior. Their spirits, most keen on keeping other young people from similar fates or myriad abuses in the vast, churning, industrial behemoth city, quietly stood watch over the proceedings as devoted spectral assets to the Ghost Precinct. Zofia chose to remain a consistent haunt. Olga chose to manifest only during seances. Both girls were silvery, luminous, with dark charcoal hair pulled back from their sharp-featured faces. The darkened, singed hem of their simple dresses was the only reminder of how they died. The appearance of these precinct assets, ghostly, serene faces staring at their living friends, heralded the opening of the spirit realm to mortal ears. There was a rushing sound through the room, an ethereal echo as if a great door had been opened. "There's a host of children," Zofia said, uneasy, "and they've been wronged somehow." "We are listening," Cora responded, speaking loudly to the spirit world as a whole, but nodding at Zofia to make sure the girl knew she was heard and understood. So often spirits spoke, trying to help the living, and were ignored. 1,000 whispers crested around the mediums like a tidal wave, a jumble of woe, impossible to make out one word over the next. Little Jenny clapped her hands over her ears. Antonia, her tall, wide-shouldered body sitting starkly still and bolt straight, winced. Cora released a held breath carefully, slowly, as if she were lowering a great weight onto her delicate shoulders. Untucking a handkerchief from her lace cuff to dab at the moisture that had sprung up on her light brown brow. There was another sound, a scuttling behind them, though they could see nothing. They felt presences they could not see. Ghosts were unpredictable in the ways in which they manifested. The scurrying sound, accompanied by the same wash of urgent whispers, swept over to the locked file cabinets against their rear wall. The young women turned their heads very slowly. Just because one worked with the dead didn't mean they couldn't be frightening. Spirits were often creatures of startle and shock. The precinct file cabinets flew open. All of the women jumped. "But we don't even have all the keys," Cora said, wondering how the ghosts could possibly have unlocked the dusty old wooden cabinets filled with incomplete and shoddily taken case notes from earlier decades of corruption and disarray. Below one of the 4 desks scattered about the long room, the center drawer creaked open of its own accord. Then another desk drawer, then a third. Papers rustled. A few flew out, then a few more. Jenny edged over to the 17-year-old Antonia, who held her long arm out for the little girl who had become a surrogate sister, and the child tucked in against her. Antonia kept herself calm and collected, for Jenny's sake, if nothing else. The little girl didn't need to sign in sign language, nor did she need to write a note to be understood. Her small form shook, making Antonia hold her all the tighter. The child didn't need to have any further traumas added to her condition of selective mutism. "Spirits, what do you wish to tell us?" Cora demanded, finding her voice. "And why this display? You've never been the sort to give us poltergeists," Antonia exclaimed. "Find us," came a murmur that consolidated from the voices, the words racing around the room in a freezing chill. Though no spirits could be seen to have made the declaration, it came from the fabric of the air itself, repeating again in aching earnest, "Come find what we've lost." Thank you. So that was the first chapter of A Sanctuary of Spirits, available now in ebook as well as trade paperback form wherever books are sold, and hopefully at your local library. If you don't have it in your local library, request it. Libraries help authors all the time. They buy books and they support us, and it's a great way to help your community and also your favorite authors. So I'm going to now glance over at the chat here. If you have questions about my books, my process, about ghosts in New York, I am a ghost tour guide, and a lot of what I write about, the ghosts, historic New York, the paths that my characters walk, I walk them on my tours. Admittedly, our tours are now a little virtual, so I'm not quite pounding the pavement as I usually do, and I miss my walks very much. But walking the paths that my characters walk is very important to me. I want to sort of haunt the places. It's interesting that we, as living beings and as ghosts, use haunt in the same way. So I love haunting the areas that my characters haunt. So these are places I know and love very dearly as I wander around Greenwich Village telling ghost stories as part of Burrows of the Dead, the ghost tour company where I work. So I'm going to glance over here at the chat. So give me 1 second as I catch up here. Um, we've got, thank you so much for the kind words about the passage. And thank you for posting my website. Yes, leannareneheiber.com. I'm also on all social medias. So, oh, thank you. So thank you for your Guy Versailles. I appreciate this for the stopping watching a ghost show for me. I'm honored. I I definitely love audiobooks. I am, in terms of your comment about audiobooks, I am not the audiobook narrator of book 1, but I'm hoping that book 2 and book 3, I will be the narrator for those audiobooks, but they are not out just yet. So I do have things that I have narrated. And so I also have lots of videos where I do excerpts from my books as well. You can find that on my YouTube channel. And so thank you. Oh, hello, Joseph. Thank you for being here. So, thank you for the kind words. So this is the second book of the series. Yes. So, this is A Sanctuary of Spirits. However, you can, if you want to just start right in with the action and you don't care about the backstory, you could start right in with this one. The first book is called The Spectral City. It's a red cover with a creepy eye in the middle, sort of esoteric, very sort of Illuminati looking, that speaks to the esoteric nature of the series. So, so yes, this is A Sanctuary of Spirits, book 2. Book 1 is The Spectral City. Book 3, which is available for pre-order digitally, is called A Summoning of Souls. So this is a great question. Okay, so I've got 2 great questions from Jen and Joe. When you're writing, do you hear each voice individually? I love this question and thank you. And yes, I do. I think this comes from the fact that I am trained as an actress. I trained in classical theater. I did a lot of historical theater as well as a lot of Shakespeare. And so a lot of my early writing training really was more along the lines of playwriting, directing, acting, performing. So my characters are very distinct. I spend a lot of time. My daydreaming process before I sit down to really write is really about thinking about my characters, who they are, what they're about, and what gift each one of them can bring to the table. All of my books are kind of like a Scooby gang that gets together to save the day. And especially in the case of these female mediums who are found family for each other, each one of them has a different distinct gift that they bring. And I wanted all of them to feel not only welcome, because they are all from different identities and different backgrounds, whether Antonia as a trans woman, her backstory is very different than Cora as a Creole woman who came up from New Orleans to join the Ghost Precinct, and then Jenny, who I mentioned in the selection too, is a young 9-year-old. She was orphaned, and the spirits of her parents led her to Eve Whitby's Ghost Precinct. So Eve as the manager, and we see Eve's off on her own adventure. Eve as manager kind of becomes this sort of, auntie to the rest of this group, and they all look out for each other. And so those distinct characters, and that's really what I think people tend to read my books for and come back to my books for, is I get the most comments about the character driven nature of my work. And so that's kind of my driving force. So absolutely, each one of them develop their own voice. And I try to really listen for that, to try to make sure that they do sound distinct. And part of that is honing in on each one of their specialties. And that helps to kind of make them each distinct. And I think that about human beings. I think we all have something really unique to give, and we all have a unique voice. And so it's really about treasuring that and cherishing that. And that goes right into the writing. So thank you for that. Um, Okay, so do I listen to music when I write? Absolutely, and thank you for this. What I cannot do is I cannot listen to music with lyrics. Now, y- uh, n- I'm not alone in that, but I'm also that doesn't go for all writers. Many friends of mine, brilliant writers, love to listen to music with lyrics in the background. For me, it has to be sort of a classical music, kind of ethereal. I tend to try to have very atmospheric things. So I've been listening to a lot of film scores. Philip Glass, who has a beautiful energy to his work, but it also is kind of a consistent driving motion. Another great film composer, Max Richter. I've been listening to him a lot. As well as there's a great Chopin Variations album, which it's all Chopin, but it's deconstructed, sort of a postmodern Chopin. So I listen also to a lot of period music. I love to listen to classical music because it's sort of the popular music. You know, Chopin is contemporary to some of my characters, and his work would have been played on pianos. You know, people were having to sort of do their own music in their houses if they were lucky enough to have a piano. A lot of times, you know, my characters weren't necessarily able to afford phonographs. They're pretty rare in my work. So, you know, popular music tends to sort of be classical. There were, of course, a lot of art songs. Ragtime was just coming into vogue in 1899, so a little Scott Joplin is always welcome. There's a really cool atmospheric music channel that I stream called Hearts of Space. It's a public broadcasting show, and it's really nice atmospheric music, and it's just a constant stream. Um, the host Stephen Hill will introduce the work, and then you can listen to all kinds of different channels: choral, atmospheric, sort of space music kind of stuff, very atmospheric stuff that I love to have in the background. So that's definitely something that I turn to. So I know I'm not alone in the movie soundtrack kind of crowd that enjoys having that in the background, kind of making us feel cinematic, because I definitely see what's happening in my mind and I sort of translate it onto the page as best I possibly can. So thank you. Oh, good. Fellow Max Richter fans here in the chat. Yep, Philip Glass, always great. You can't go wrong with Philip Glass. Some of his, although I will say Einstein on the Beach is a little tricky. That one gets a little frenetic. So some more of his modern film scores, especially the hours, that I've written several books with the hours in the background. So a little Virginia Woolf shout out there, right? So great. Thank you so much. Let's see. Yes. So, okay, good. So, I love that in the chat we're seeing some links to make sure that you're supporting our fellow vendors in the COGS marketplace. I also have an Etsy store. So, if you are curious about wanting any signed books from me, you can get them from my Etsy store. My Etsy store is Torch and Arrow. So, it's Etsy shop/Torch and Arrow. That's my Etsy store. I do adore Einstein on the Beach, but I get a little distracted when I'm listening to it. So following the chat here, it's one of those things that kind of just has to be experienced. And I suppose if I'm writing a particularly frenetic day in Manhattan, that actually might work, right? So want to make sure I have not, okay. Sakura loves backstory. Okay, great. Great. I love backstory too. So you'll get a lot of backstory in Spectral City. So just fair warning. I should mention, for those who might be new to my work, that all of my characters are crossover characters. So Sanctuary of Spirits, the Spectral City, this is a family legacy. Eve Whitby is the daughter of the hero and heroine from my young adult series, Darker Still. Here, I will do a visual aid here, 1 second. So Darker Still is was my young adult series that came out in 2011, a trilogy as well. So these lovely folks grow up and have a child, and that child goes on to run the Ghost Precinct. So you don't have to have read these books to enjoy these books. However, you'll have even more backstory that way. So some people are like, well, you're alluding to some things that happened in the past. Yes, kind of, because I kind of like the idea that if you've gone through a paranormal war, as these characters did, you might not necessarily want to talk about it. So there's a lot of stuff that, much like other veterans who have gone through traumatic things, sometimes they don't want to talk about things. So even though not all of that's revealed here, there is also a good and understandable sense about that, because it's not everybody's an open book, even your family. So thank you. Oh, thank you. I'm so glad you love Darker Still. That is very meaningful to me. Thank you for that. Okay, research. So we've got a research question. And thank you so much for posting the link to my Etsy. That's great. And I also want to shout out my business partner, Tom Truelove, who is a great sculptor and also digital artist. And you can experience, if you're having a little hard time with quarantine, as we all are, I point you towards Pandora's Pets. We sculpt little creatures that help you with worries. And so if you have any questions about that, you can contact me or Tom Truelove. He's very active on Facebook, and is in and out of the COGS, chats and stuff here and there. So feel free to reach out to us about anything that you're curious about on the Etsy. Not only do I have signed books, but we each have some invented and reimagined vintage jewelry that kind of is along the themes of the stuff that we're writing about and that we like to talk about in person. We would be having a table talking to you in person here this weekend, and we miss you all and wish that we were there in person to share and to chat with you. But I hope to be joining you all in the fall. But in the meantime, we do appreciate your support of our shop. We really appreciate that. So now back to our research question. Thank you so much. So, all right, my guy Versailles. All right. So how do you accomplish research? A weak point. Okay. So you find that this a weak point for you, a supernatural story that requires in-depth research on religion, the occult, and everything that goes with it. Okay. Yes, I do have recommendations. When you start dealing with the occult, there is so many ways to go about it. What you're going to want to figure out is is there a particular discipline? Is there a particular sect that you want to follow along with? I'm going to recommend a really great book that's a wonderful overview, and that might help you decide what you then want to go further. I would recommend books about the time period that mention many different occult wings and practices and people and spiritual leaders, and sort of see who and what really calls to you. What are the things that correspond and correlate with the things that you already have in your mind? You already have things in your work that you're already being called to. What correlates with that in a historical time period? You're allowed to kind of hunt and peck. You don't have to do exhaustive research that covers absolutely everything. If it doesn't factor into your book, then you don't actually need to do that. You don't actually need to have every last little minutia in the book. It's not good for the pacing to have it completely exhaustive. You're going to want to kind of touch down on these on some historic moments. One of the reasons why I liked to kind of open this book the way I did was to give you this view of New York, of historic New York, with the sights and sounds of New York, but do it while we're moving, do it while you're in action. So anytime that you can find pieces of historical research that help with that action, that's when you want to bring in those historic research pieces to back up your story, of course. In terms of the occult, a lot of stuff is online. The Gutenberg Project is a great online resource that has 19th century texts that have been uploaded. You certainly don't want to engage in piracy of modern texts. These are things that are in the public domain. So the Gutenberg Project is A-okay. And you can find 19th century texts about spiritualism, esoterica, and you can see what people were writing about at the time. It was the Center for Psychical Research, the Theosophical Society, any number. There's a wonderful list of these that you can find in a book. This is a modern book, so please do support this author because he's a working author now. The book is called Occult America by Mitch Horowitz. So I'm going to see if I can actually put that in the chat here. Hold on a second. Occult America by Mitch Horowitz. Horowitz, like my detective. So there we go. That book is very, very, very good in its overview. And one of the things that I really, really love about this book, about Occult America, is that Mitch Horowitz as a writer writes in a very accessible manner, but he does not judge these movements. Whether he's talking about the origin of Mormonism in upstate New York, or he's talking about the Order of the Golden Dawn or the Rosicrucians or any of the other various sects of Seventh-day Adventism or Mesmerism or the Swedenborgians or any of these esoteric movements, he doesn't talk about them with a bias or those silly people for believing these silly things. Not at all. He's like, here's the facts, here's when these things started, and here was the cultural context of that. So that's one of my favorite books that I think that for me really helped me define the types of things I wanted to put into my book. I only mention a few actual spiritualists of the time period. I mention Emma Harding Britton for one. Eve references her in the third Spectral City book because Emma Harding Britton wrote tons of books that would have been published and well out into the world by the time that Eve was creating the Ghost Precinct. So those are extant texts. So I went and looked and sort of cherry picked a few appropriate things for Eve to reference there. I want Eve to be in a realistic spiritualist world, even though Eve is based on an amalgam of possible spiritualists, not on any one person. I want to have some artistic license. It's one of the reasons why I do like writing historical fantasy, is that I do lots of research, but I also make sure that I'm making strides to make sure that I have inclusion of characters. I do want to say, when you're thinking about research and you're thinking about inclusion, if you're involving folks from other diaspora other than your own, other identities other than your own, I do employ sensitivity readers. I hire them. They look through, make sure that nothing I've done is inadvertently offensive. So I hired several sensitivity readers for this series because I have a Jewish hero, I have a trans woman, I have a biracial woman of color. And I also have, issues about chronic pain and disability as well. I myself do suffer from chronic migraines, so that's something I do have some personal experience with. When folks are saying, "Oh wow, her descriptions of migraines are really accurate," yeah, I know that from personal experience. So, but that's another way when you're talking about research. A lot of historic texts, if they're written from a white colonialist perspective, you got to be aware you have to take the inherent racism out of that stuff. So if you're looking at historic guidebooks, which I do, like I've looked at historic tourism books, you have to be aware that there's going to be biases in there. So you have to read between the lines to get the facts, but not be continuing the harm from that time period as well. So I hope that that's a broad answer there. And if there's other specifics, feel free. We've still got some time. All right. So thank you. Thanks, friends. Don't go Les Mis style. Okay. So this referencing the idea of how much details should go in to your book. Don't go Les Mis style where there's 80 or 60 pages just describing the priest. That is very fair. And I have to say, I did read the unabridged Les Mis when I was 14, and there's a whole chapter about the dialect of prisoners, which is sort of fascinating, but it completely derails the actual action of the plot. So yes, definitely when it goes into historic details, save every last exhaustive bit of details for your blog. That's supplemental research. And then the people that want to nerd out with you, totally, that stuff is great and useful. But if your editor is saying, hey, you know what, we're being bogged down by detail, save those details out, put them in a side document and be like, these are all the things that I loved researching, but that I couldn't fit into the book without detracting from the pacing. Pacing is tricky. So that's why you want to make sure any historical detail that you do put in, that you're trying to make it do double duty. Make sure that it's telling you something about the character, or the action, the plot, or something that needs to be resolved in that moment. So making sure those details do more than one thing, that will help in how you pick what to put in there. You definitely want to create a world, and you do want that world to be well researched. Do the best you can, and then continue to get it with other critique partners. My editor is a wonderful outside eye. I do love working with editors. That's been a great thing for me. I do go the traditionally published route because I do like having that team of other people that are helping me put a book out into the world. But independent publishing is a wonderful option too. You're on your own a little bit more to get all of these things together, but there are also great communities like the COGS community of fellow creatives that can be offering up wonderful resources. So even just in this chat, we've got great ideas. So thank you. Okay, we're at time in a minute. Okay, so I just want to thank everybody. If there's something in the chat that I missed, please tweet at me at Leanna Renee. You're welcome to go to my website. I have writers' resources there. I also have a contact form, so any questions, I'm available for all of you. I want to thank the whole streaming community here for coming together and making this all happen. You guys are the best. Mwah. Thank you.